So the other night, I'm cruising through YouTube, and I come across a channel called the Hot Rod Hoarder, right? It's got tons of neat stuff, and I'm looking at all of this, you know, all of this rings a bell because I'm into old diggers and stuff like that. And then I realized he lives in Tennessee, not too far from me. So I messaged him. This is him, Tommy Lee Boyd, the Hot Rod Hoarder.
Tommy Lee Bird.
Bird.
That's okay. That's all right. No big deal.
There's a Y in there that gets you, right?
Yeah.
It's Tommy Lee Bird.
Tommy Lee Bird.
So he says, yeah, come on down and check it out. So here we are. And Tommy's going to give us a tour. If I can get out of this. You say this was built by who?
This was raced by Tetsu Ishimaru in the late 50s. Built by Joe Ito. Built a lot of chassis back in that time.
Well, the Ito brothers were junior fuel guys. They were big junior fuel hitters, like in 1967, 68, 69. But yeah, he must have been like tiny because I couldn't get in, I can't get back out. Okay, here, talk to him while I struggle my way out of this thing.
All right, so me and my dad, we have a really good relationship. We've been buying and selling and trading on cars for a long time, since I was a teenager. And I guess about 10 years ago, we started getting into vintage drag cars and parts and just junk. And we've accumulated a lot in that time. And some of it sits outside. I guess some of it that we consider not that great of condition. It's not going to hurt it. It's been outside for 50 years, so no big deal there.
Patina is king here.
Yeah, we got a lot of that. But we got some good stuff inside too, and just kind of a collection of old parts and old stuff. Some of it's sentimental, some of it's just stuff that we've stumbled across.
We were looking at this one here when we first pulled up. Crude. I mean, you want to talk about crude.
Very, yes. This one, we dug it out of the woods, and it was actually, the car was cut in two right here at this joint. You might notice that this is a bigger pipe than that, so this car's already been cut and pieced together at some point. But
this is water pipe.
Yes, built out of water pipe. Definitely this section of it. The front half actually looks like decent fabrication, but the back is pretty scary.
It's clearly gas welded together with a cutting torch.
Yep. Yeah, we don't know much history on this one. I'm assuming just by these motor mounts it's probably Chevrolet powered, but kind of hard to say anything else. It does have a 55 through 57 Chevrolet rear end in it. But other than that, it's kind of just a piece of junk, honestly. There's not much to it.
But you have a couple of them that are really beautiful.
Yeah, and that's kind of what got us hooked, was seeing those cars, how good they can look, and you know, we could sandblast these things and paint them and make them look like something, but that's not really the point with.
No,
with these
this
out
is
here.
yeah.
They're more just like yard ornaments.
The funny car over here.
Yeah, that one we bought specifically because it had a set of spindle mount front wheels on it. We bought it at a swap meet, and honestly the rest of the chassis kind of looked like a dune buggy. It didn't really look like a funny car to me, but the more I started researching, it was a very early funny car. More than likely ran just in the funny car class in like 1967, and then after that it kind of changed a little bit, became a bracket car eventually, got passed along to a few different owners, and it ended up in a junkyard in Georgia. And that's, I guess, the guy that got it out of the junkyard brought it straight to this swap meet and sold it to us.
Yeah, the unique thing about this car is that it really reeks of 1967. It's like it's the only period in funny car evolution that it kind of could have been built.
Yeah, just looking at the frame and suspension design, I mean, it's obviously very early.
Yeah, come in here.
Very.
Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily say it's crude, but it's very early. Compared to these, it's not crude.
Compared to those, it's not crude, but so it looks like they started out with a Romeo Palomides chassis, because I'm familiar with all of this back here, and then it looks like it was modified somewhere along the line. You see the original tubes were cut out of it here, and these were all added. Yeah, these things are actually not going on 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, according to what I found out, the car was owned and built by Joe Graziano in Illinois. It had a blown fuel big block Chevy. I think it had a 4-port Hilburn setup, and the car ran a best of 791, or according to his son, he said it ran a best of 791 at 180. And you know, probably not on pace for 67, but pretty strong running.
Well, actually, you know, for 67, that is. It's an evil piece. Let's go see what you got in the garage here. Oh, wait, before we even do that, while we're out here, let's look at this thing here.
Yeah, we got to look at Henry J. This thing, this belonged to one of my dad's buddies in the 70s, and it was kind of a mixture of a street car, got drag raced on occasion. Pretty wild setup. It kind of looks tame from the outside, but you got to look where the engine is. That's the cool part to me. It's just kind of right there.
This guy had titanium cojones.
Yeah, no doubt. And it was a 4-speed car back in the day. It's got an automatic in there now, but pretty wild setup. You
were telling me about this thing. He matched raced another local guy.
Yeah,
with a similar setup.
Local guy here in Dayton had a 37 Chevy, and they actually raced over at Buffalo Valley drag strip, which is a long commute from here. And they were flat towing, no trailers, no ramp trucks. And they decided they were going to race. They'd get over there to Buffalo Valley and they exchanged words, and I don't know what, because it was before my time. But it was something to the effect of, I'd rather blow my car up than get beat by you. And he did blow it up, and I think he got beat, so it's probably a really bad day for him. But what blew up was the flywheel and pressure plate and clutch just came apart. And it had an aluminum bell housing in it. Probably a bad decision on a high winding small block, but parts and pieces came out of this car every which way. And the story on it that I was always told as a kid was that a big chunk of the flywheel came out of the roof and, you know, cut through the headers, cut through the brake lines. It made a big mess of the car. Well, when we ended up with this car, the very first thing that I had to go look at was to look underneath the roof and see if that damage was there. If that was a real story or if that was kind of a stretch story. And
it's
sure
there.
enough, it's there.
Come here, I don't know if you got to get up underneath here, but there's a big slab of Bondo right where the clutch come through the car. So, I mean, this thing, like, there's no evidence that this ever had any tin surrounding the motor or anything.
I think it did have something.
It had something?
At some point in its life. This big brake assembly, all of that was added later on.
Oh, okay.
I'm thinking it may have taken the place of whatever tin work was on there. And strangely enough, even with the stance, the 70s type stance, it does have a straight axle on the front. It's just way up inside of it.
So, trivia for you guys. The way you tell the difference with these older cars, the way you tell the difference between a gasser and an altered is by engine setback. The gasser has a 10% engine setback, 10% of the wheelbase measured from the center of the front spindle to the #1 spark plug hole, and an altered has a 25% setback. And this thing has got the full 25% setback, so that's trivia.
Yeah. Yeah, and this one is just another, I guess you could say, sentimental car, because my dad's really had it, and my dad run around with this guy. My dad had a Henry J. Gasser too, so there were several in this area. His was a little more conventional. His was 10% setback, you know, traditional Gasser stance, but still pretty neat that there were running buddies, and we ended up being able to buy this car.
Let's go check out the stuff inside.
All right.
As we go past a pile of 409 heads. Do you have the rest of that motor?
No, not the rest of that one. We do have a 409, but that one, I bought that out of a garage about this size. It was packed with Corvette parts and just Chevrolet parts. I can't walk away from 348 409s.
No. Wait, before we even go there, we gotta look at this. And now you say that this is actually close to being able to run?
It's one of the closer ones we have, yes. I mean, it still needs a lot of buttoning up as far as fuel system and stuff like that, but it's not too far off. It's one of those things that it sits here way more than it gets worked on, but still a pretty cool piece.
So tell the story on this one.
Okay, this car, we got pictures of this car, my dad does, from when his best friend, Dennis George, the guy's name is on the door there, he raced this car in the late 70s and early 80s. My dad ended up storing it for him at our house. So like when my dad would paint a car, because that's what he's done pretty much his whole life, my dad would paint a car, he'd pull it out in front of the house, take a picture of it, this thing would be in the background for years. So my dad's buddy, Dennis, ended up selling the car to a guy he worked with. The guy actually lived in Nashville, so this car went to Nashville as a roller. The guy only wanted the rear end out of it. He didn't want anything else. He was going to build a Pro Street something. So he wanted that rear end. The project never happened, thankfully, so this car sat pretty much untouched, just like this, for 20-something years. And I had posted a picture, one of those pictures of this car that my dad had, on a forum, just because it's a cool car. And I just put a little caption on there of, I wonder where this thing ended up. Well, the guy, probably 2 years later, responded with a picture of this car, just like this. He's like, this is what it looks like in my garage. So, a couple years after that, we were able to buy it. Then, once we got it home, I was able to track down the history from day one on the car, which is even more interesting than, you know, my dad and his buddy having it. So, the car originally was built by Larry Stewart. He was in Nashville. He raced for several years before this car came along, and this was kind of his next step, his next evolution, I guess you could say, as far as his racing program goes. He had raced 2 Kellisons before this car, and he actually pulled a mold off of one of his standard Kellisons and built this
for people who
body.
aren't familiar, Kellison is a kit car body.
Correct.
This is similar to the Cheetah. Is it the same?
It's similar, and you would have normally, if you were just building a Kellison, you would have gotten this body and it would go on a Corvette chassis and run a gear. The first 2 cars that Larry Stewart built were on Corvette frames.
Okay.
This car, he intentionally kind of scrapped the frame idea and built a frame for it. Built this body from scratch. It's actually a little narrower than a standard Kellison, and it's much longer. So, you know, it's been lengthened quite a bit.
Now, he home built this chassis, but it looks very much like a Logie. Actually, it looks like just a narrowed, like they took 6 or 8 inches out of a Logie chassis.
Yeah, it's pretty much a straight up copy of a Logie. He had some buddies that raced funny cars and pretty much just borrowed a frame and just kind of copied it. There's a couple little differences and a couple things that are homemade, like the ladder bars are made out of square tubing, and a couple little pieces here and there that are recognizable.
Hey, get a shot of those ladder bars.
With the history with Larry Stewart, I was able to go talk to him, visit his shop, and pretty much get the full history on it. So basically, the frame was built in 1970, but he built the body in 1967. He ran it on a different chassis in the early years of this car. It ran in a modified sports car originally,
Okay.
so it was stock wheelbase. It wasn't stretched out like this. And then when those rules started changing, he went over to be altered, and that's when he built this chassis, lengthened it, you know, kind of changed the engine setup and stuff too.
So,
He raced it from 67 to 72, changed the paint job every single year, so it had a different look every year. Stopped racing in 72, built an A Street Roadster car in 73. This car sat outside, and my dad's buddy Dennis bought it from him.
so this is basically as it was last run in 1973.
No, when my dad's buddy bought it, he rebuilt it. So
Oh,
he
okay.
stripped off those 6 or 7 paint jobs,
Oh, okay.
did this paint job, and he bracket raced it, and he had several different engine setups and stuff in it. It last raced in 1982, and it had this paint job. It had a small block Chevrolet at that point.
And this body, we were messing around. We wanted to get this thing up before. Let's let this down so we
Okay.
can get, because this car's got a crazy profile.
Sure.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
This is the heaviest funny car body I have ever. Wow. Uh-oh. punching tin. Here we go.
We're hung on the side.
Okay.
It's all right.
Get a look at the profile of this thing. It's too much. I need to see this thing go down the track.
I do too. This is, I think it's the most realistic as far as the chassis and stuff is actually really well built compared to some of our other projects. So I think this is the closest thing to running that we got.
No water pipe in this one.
Not that I know of.
But there might be water pipe in that thing.
Yeah, you can pretty much count on that. This one is a home-built car from the early 60s, built right here in Dayton, Tennessee. Built by a guy named Jim Smith. And I did a video on this car on my Hot Rod Hoarder channel.
We'll put a link to that video.
And this thing is, I mean, it's rough and crusty, but it's got a really neat history. And the guy that built it kept it all these years, just had it in the woods, all tore apart. And we were fortunate enough to be able to buy it, stick it back together, and then take it back to him to kind of show, you know, he already knew what it looked like, but he hadn't seen it together in probably 50 years.
That's awesome.
So the frame itself was in the woods. It had a big tree growing up through it. The engine and cylinder heads were in the barn. The wind intake manifold and the 6 Strombergs, they were in another building. The rest of the parts were actually stuffed in like 57 Dodge and DeSotos that were also in the woods. Lots of good homemade stuff. And the only thing that was missing on this car was the rear end housing. We cut down 8 3/4 to stick in there just to kind of make it look right and roll. But the rest of this stuff, I mean, he made this out of a giant drum, cut it down, welded it, gas
The clutch can is made out of a drum.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then this is, you can still see, that is an input shaft welded to a drive shaft. That was his setup. The original axles, we've got them somewhere, but they're not, obviously not in this rear end. But they were cut and butt welded, and you can still see the shiny nickel welding on it. Obviously the tracks around here and the tire technology didn't allow this thing to ever actually hook up. So I guess a butt welded axle is just fine for this setup.
That's crazy. No pinion support either, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty crude as far as driveline and setup.
Well, about this era is when they started putting the pinion support in here because of the Crispin incident, which, yeah, you know about.
The coolest thing about this car, my favorite thing, I guess, is the motor mounts. I don't know if you noticed those or not. Those are Ford Flathead BH60 connecting rods.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, had the right size journal for this frame rail.
That is awesome. Yeah, it's perfect. How close is that motor to be able to like, cackle?
Not very.
Not very?
It was blown up in, this car last ran in '64. He put that motor in and altered. It had an automatic transmission, and he said the transmission flew apart, revved the motor up, dropped a valve, had a big bad problem with that. So he pretty much just put it in the barn. The engine itself is probably not usable, maybe the heads are, but he also, in the same barn that came out of, had a 392 that he said was going to be the next motor for this car. But by '64, this thing was like crazy outdated. So he just kind of gave up on that and kept the engine though, so I guess that's good.
And then you got this one back here.
Yeah, that one is a Lindwood chassis. That's actually the first vintage drag car that we bought. We found this thing sitting on the side of the road up in Maryville, Tennessee. It just had a little for sale sign on it. It's kind of an unusual way to stumble across an old drag car, but it had an engine in it. It's pretty much stock 350, just had a single 4-barrel carburetor. But we wanted to kind of make it a little more period correct, not go totally crazy, because if we did, we'd be cutting the roll cage apart and all that to make it 100% correct. But we put the Pete Jackson fuel injection setup on there, really rare piece, only one I've ever seen. Got a magneto in there. Obviously on a stock motor that's not going to perform very well, but it looks cool. And it's good for a background here in our shop.
So you can't really see the front of this thing because it's all covered
Yeah,
with stuff, but it's got like a really early front end on it.
Yeah, this car had a leaf spring front end and a little friction shocks, and that was kind of a trademark of Linwood chassis. Right up until the very end of Linwood production, they started using torsion bar, which was industry standard by that point. But this is a very late Linwood car. It has small frame rails instead of Linwood's trademark large single frame rail.
Okay.
So this was a late car for Linwood, probably 63.
63.
Maybe early 64. And then at some point somebody lengthened it. At this point it's 168-inch wheelbase, which is kind of hard to see, but significantly longer than what it would have been. It probably started as about 130-inch wheelbase.
So that's it for the cars, right?
That's pretty much it for the car. We've got a lot of parts and things too that we've kind of collected over the years. The magnesium wheels is kind of a thing that we're sort of addicted to finding these things, and I don't know what we're going to do with them,
But you've got them.
They're cool to look at. So some of these, I mean, they look like they've just been in a barn for years, and maybe they have, but we're going to just keep the patina going, I guess. And some of the other cool stuff, we've got a pretty cool go-kart here that belonged to my uncle. It's got twin McCullough two-stroke engines on it. Pretty wild setup for, mid to late 60s is kind of when this was.
This is when karting was like king,
yeah,
right?
It was hot for sure.
Yeah, it's got all of that trademark stuff from like 1960.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so that one, I mean, it's rusty. It's probably pretty far gone as far as trying to restore it, but the engines are complete. I mean, there's some potential for that one for sure.
That could be a riot, man.
Yeah.
And of course, you got the DeSoto stack injector.
Yeah, that was just kind of a yard sale find. I mean, it's incomplete and kind of cobbled together, but
Still,
pretty
it's a
fun.
DeSoto
yeah.
stack injector. And then you got 409 sitting over here.
Yeah.
What's the story with that thing?
409's got a big old story. That car, or that engine, came out of a 55 Chevrolet Gasser that ran here locally. And the engine itself sat in a barn for lots of years. And basically, anytime I was riding with my dad and we went past that barn, he'd tell me there's a 409 in that barn. As a kid, it probably didn't mean a lot to me, but I always remember that. Well, we finally had a chance to buy it. And it didn't have any, actually had 348 cylinder heads.
Okay, so you got Edelbrock aluminum.
So we put an Edelbrock top end on it. But the bottom end was the interesting part because it has no serial numbers on it. It does have a casting number for 1963, but no serial numbers on the front pad. So from my research, that showed that it was an over-the-counter block.
Z11, is it?
I was hoping it was. Z11 would have been like holy grail.
Right.
Yeah, but it turns out this was just a kind of your standard 409, but it's inside is just a mismatched bunch of parts. It's got a 62 crank, 63 11-to-1 compression pistons. This thing's obviously been pieced together by somebody. I don't know exactly who, but the guy we got it from that ran it back in the 60s, his name was Don Roberts. So he ran it in a 55 Chevrolet, ran it in B gas. He wrecked the car on the street, barrel rolled it, just destroyed the car, pulled the motor and transmission out of it, put that in the barn, and he buried the car. Again, kind of like the clutch explosion thing.
Right.
That kind of just sounded like a story, like, okay. But we found the car, and we attempted to dig it up. There's also a video on my channel of that. That was not a successful adventure because there wasn't much of the car left, but we did go and we dug most of it out just to kind of see what was there, because as we started learning more about the engine, we learned more about Don. He actually had an excavating company, so he had the equipment and he just buried it instead of scrapping it. But anyways, we went to go look, and a corner of the cowl was sticking up out of the ground from where just the ground had kind of washed away. And that gave us a little bit of hope. We rented a mini excavator to go out there and played around for half a day and picked it up out of its hole and gave it a good look, and then just sat it back down and covered it back up, because it was like a lost cause. But I did get the dash out of it. That was my souvenir.
Okay.
I put it out there.
So what's that motor going to go in?
The plan is to find a 55
Okay.
to recreate that car. I mean, 55s are fairly easy to find, but I want to find the right one as far as straight axle, radius, rear wheel wells. Try to recreate that big ass car. You know, some of the stuff's not period correct. Obviously, all that aluminum stuff is.
Yeah, but you
all
got all
new.
these heads sitting out there.
Yeah. So there's a lot of potential there. That was a magazine project, and you know about magazine projects,
I
and
don't know too much about magazine projects.
yeah. So that was one of those things where Edelbrock kind of made it worth my while to put all that stuff on there. So that worked
What
out.
magazine was that in, in case somebody wants to?
Super Chevy magazine. This would have been around 2014 when
Okay.
we did this. It was a 3-part tech story, and you know, it's one of those things when you have a magazine deadline, you got all this stuff. It's kind of like, why am I doing this? But then when we fired this thing up, I mean, it's a pretty healthy sounding motor. We put a hydraulic roller cam in it, and it'll do good in whatever we put it in.
Did you put it on a dyno or just?
We put it on the dyno, and that was about the scariest thing I've ever done.
How's that?
It was just like intense.
Okay,
I've had
yeah.
cars on a chassis dyno, but never an engine dyno where it was like screaming right there.
Right,
in my
yeah,
face.
it's a whole different experience when it's not under the hood.
It's
I
weird.
know.
It was weird.
What did it make?
It made right at 500.
Nice.
It was right there. It was one of those things that we didn't spend a week on the dyno trying to just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze to get everything out of it.
Yeah.
But pretty
Well, I mean,
strong.
for a raw
street-
pull, 500 horsepower is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, those motors, I guess you could get them with 409 horsepower or 425 horsepower from the factory. So it's not a huge upgrade from factory, but still good running motor.
And I may need to take that home.
Yeah, that's 66 BSA, and the seats just kind of sitting there.
That's all right.
This
Oh, that's,
thing,
that's me.
this thing is it's 70s all the way. I mean, whoever did the framework on it, it's got a hardtail frame, Springer front end, all that stuff is.
I had a
pretty much-
Sporty that was pretty much exactly like this. We'll talk about this. It's something we'll definitely talk about.
It's definitely a neat project. It's one of those things we just couldn't pass up, and you know, we're not really sentimental about it, so it is available.
I could hang around here all day.
There's a lot of stuff. You got to look hard to find some of it. We have started kind of building some shelves and having a way to display a little bit of it, but some of this stuff we've got packed away. I mean, if we were to ever clean out the place, we'd probably find more that we didn't know we had.
Well, I tell you, the name of your channel fits, man. That's, you are the hot rod Hoarder.
What's really bad is I've got a shop of my own at my house that it doesn't have a bunch of old drag cars in it, but it's full of stuff too. I mean, it's bad. It's a bad problem.
It's a good problem to have. So you got a couple of books out.
Yeah, I've written a few books and I do magazine work and just a lot of different things. I guess the most popular book I've done is called Lost Drag Strips, and that's what started this obsession about old drag cars and finding old pictures and researching old cars and all that kind of stuff. So that I always liked old drag cars and new drag cars, but that book really kind of took my obsession to the next level.
And what other books do you have?
One's called Street Sleepers, and the other one is Detroit Speed's How to Build a Pro Touring Car. A little outside of my realm, but yeah.
So how do people buy these things?
They are available on Amazon. Some of them have kind of aged out, so they're out of production, but you can still find them on Amazon and eBay. They were in bookstores back when that was a thing, and you know, we're kind of past that point, I guess, in society. But yeah.
It's all about YouTube now.
Yeah.
And his channel is the Hot Rod Hoarder.
That's right. And I post once a week. I wish I could post more, but I got a regular job and lots of other things going on, so I try to do once a week and try to keep it pretty fresh with some old stuff and some of these other projects that we run across, and not just focus solely on the vintage drag cars, but just try to mix it up.
Thank you so much for sharing this stuff with us.
No problem.
Awesome collection, man.
Thank you.
And when you get that thing ready to go, I want to get my hands on that.
I definitely want to, hopefully in the next I don't know. I don't want to say when, but I would love for in the next few months for us to actually work on this thing a little bit more and get it to where it'll at least fire off and check out the transmission, make sure it takes gear and all that good stuff. It's
Yeah,
a
no,
pretty neat piece.
I'm definitely, I just don't want to lift the body.
Yeah, no. When it goes to the track, there's going to be no spark plug checking, none of that. It's just going to be
Climb in through the little hole right here and go.
maintenance free. Because I can't imagine, you know, actually trying to work on this thing. You're basically taking your life into jeopardy being under
Lifting that body. That's no joke.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Tommy, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you for coming.
And that's it. The Hot Rod Hoarder. See you guys tomorrow.